The third reason that you need to understand about psychology when you're a manager is this idea of overcoming biases. So what do I mean by this? Let's unpick this. So look, it's not just about the isms, the sexism, the racism, the ageism, religious freedom, all those sorts of isms that are covered and protected in employment law. They're important, you can't forget them. They've got to be part of your conscious thinking around, your employment practices. But what I'm really interested here is the unconscious biases. Now, this was really brought to the front by this guy, Daniel Kahneman, and his partner, Amos Tversky. And he brought all of his years and years of work together in this book called Thinking Fast and Slow. And it's generally known under this title, if you like, of behavioral economics. And as it's developed over the years, there's now something like 100 or more identified thinking biases. So, what does this mean? These are sort of unconscious ways in which your brain, the brain of everybody, me, you, everybody, thinks and makes decisions and sort of acts without us even knowing. Unconscious, subconscious biases that determine how and what we do. Well, here's just some of them. Anchoring. This is the idea that you anchor on to the first things you hear. This is particularly important in things like selling and negotiating. So, this is why, some people say you should be the first to give your price that you want, either from what you're selling or from what you're buying, in a negotiation, because you anchor somebody's expectations to that first price. If you're selling, the advice is anchor it high, and if you're buying, the advice is anchor it low. And it affects the way we think. Availability is another bias where we tend to get attracted to information where it's readily available. So just because something's available, we then tend to think that maybe it's true and it's relevant for us. But actually, if you were to look underneath the surface, you get a different story. But because it's there, maybe it's in the news, maybe you're hearing it on the radio, on the TV, in newspapers, wherever it might be, on social media, because it's there and because it's available, you tend to think it has primacy. So availability is another bias. Loss aversion. We hate losses much more than we value gains, and that affects the way in which we think of deals and doing business. Confirmation bias. This is a huge one. It's like we look for information that confirms what we believe, and we tend to ignore information that negates what we believe. You may think that doesn't apply to you, but it does. Something called the sunk cost fallacy. What that is if we've invested in something, we tend to keep going with that investment even if the evidence is telling us that it's not working. So instead of seeing it as a sunk cost, writing it off and going in a different direction, we keep plowing more resources into trying to make that investment work, and it just doesn't. One I like a lot is called the planning fallacy. It's the idea that the more we plan, the better we'll be. Obviously, planning's important, but planning doesn't take the place of action and implementation. So look, those are just 6 of 100 plus different biases, just to give you an idea, because these things are at play for both you and your team. And they distort particularly decision making. They lead to us making bad strategic decisions, poor recruitment decisions. We either become overconfident or underconfident. And it sabotages performance management, because if you have these biases in your opinions around people, for example, so if somebody looks like they're busy because they're always around, presenteeism, that's availability information. And it may cause you to have a view of that person that is disproportionate to their actual level of performance. So, these things really have an effect, and ultimately they undermine culture, because what they lead to is inconsistencies of behaviors, of perceptions of unfairness, all these things which undermine trust, which leads to a great culture. So this is hugely important, this whole area of unconscious bias. And I love this quote by Daniel Kahneman. We think, each of us, that we're much more rational than we are. And we think that we make our decisions because we have good reasons to make them. But the truth is this: we believe in the reasons because we've already made the decisions. So have a think about that. Does that apply to you? So look, if this is resonating with you, if you think you'd like to look into this more, if you want to be more certain that you're making really good decisions, I've created an ebook. It's called Make Assured Decisions, and it looks in much more depth at this concept of biases. So you can really get to understand it more. It's part of a series of 11 ebooks I've created, and this one just happens to relate to decision making.